Alright guys, we are just accelerating through the Spider-Man reviews. No Way Home is just around the corner. Thank you again for joining me for yet another Spider-Man review, where today we are ending off Andrew Garfield's run as the character, unfortunately. We are discussing The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This time around, Peter is graduating from high school, dealing with his on and off again relationship with Gwen Stacy, as well as facing off against the newest villain in New York City, Electro, played by Jamie Foxx. So if you watched my review for The Amazing Spider-Man, very appreciated by the way, then you heard my thoughts and breakdown as to why I think that movie kind of fails at telling the origin of Spider-Man and just kind of fails in my eyes as a Spider-Man movie in general. But man, when I go from The Amazing Spider-Man to The Amazing Spider-Man 2, it feels like an entirely different set of filmmakers made this movie. With The Amazing Spider-Man, they went with a really dark color scheme, which I always found so bizarre for a character as colorful as Spider-Man. But they were also going with a more realistic tone in that movie. So in a way, it kind of matched the tone and the feel of that movie. But right off the bat, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 goes in a completely different direction with its color scheme and how it presents the character of Spider-Man. The style, look, and feel of this movie is drastically different from the style, look, and feel of The Amazing Spider-Man. I mean, the opening shot of Spider-Man swinging through the city of New York, it looks like a live-action cartoon. It looks so vibrant and colorful, and Spider-Man really pops against this background of colors with his newly designed, upgraded Spider-Man suit. The suit in The Amazing Spider-Man was trying to match the realistic world by trying to make it look like something a teenager would actually make through household items that they had access to. And I don't even necessarily hate that decision. The Amazing Spider-Man has a very unique Spider-Man suit, but that being said, I absolutely adore the suit in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This is my favorite Spider-Man suit that's ever been put on film. Not only is the suit better, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man has also improved in this movie. Not only do I find Andrew's Peter more likable in this movie, but his Spider-Man even feels much more lighthearted than he did in the first film. He actually feels like a hero to me, and Andrew's ability at handling the quips of Spider-Man has also gotten much better in this movie. In the first film, the only time Peter really quipped as Spider-Man was the one scene where he's webbing up the car thief. But here, Peter as Spider-Man is quipping all throughout the movie with every battle that he's in, and Andrew Garfield himself feels much more comfortable in this role this time around.
Knock, knock. Mr. Criminal. No sparkles. Shake it off. It's just your bones, your muscles, and your organs.
His Peter is so much more enjoyable by the natural energy and charisma that Andrew Garfield brings to the screen. Andrew Garfield's comedic timing is way more utilized here. I have always loved this interaction with Aunt May.
What happened to your face? It's filthy.
It is?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I was cleaning the chimney.
We have no chimney.
What?
It's cracked me up ever since I saw this in theaters back in 2014. And somehow the chemistry between Peter and Gwen has also gotten better in this movie, and I loved it in the first one. By this time, the couple was dating, and those romantic feelings that they had for each other in real life definitely amplified their chemistry in this film. The action is also helmed so much better. They're bigger sequences, they're more exciting, and the visual effects here are just top-notch. Unfortunately though, despite these elements that honestly make The Amazing Spider-Man 2 a much more enjoyable Spider-Man experience for me than its predecessor, the movie still comes with a lot of shortcomings that really bogs it down, specifically with how many plots and characters they just throw into this movie. You have Peter seeking deeper into what happened to his parents, the story we were promised to get back in 2012, dealing with the guilt of breaking his promise of staying away from Gwen to Captain Stacy, which causes for an again, on-again, off-again relationship between the two. You have Dane and DeHaan coming in as Harry Osborn, Peter's long-lost childhood friend, who is dying from a genetic disease passed down by his now-deceased father, Norman Osborn. He believes Spider-Man's blood is the cure to saving him, but Peter as Spider-Man won't give it to him. Along with the new villain in Jamie Foxx as Max Dillon, an Oscorp employee transformed into the villainous Electro, and yet another subplot given to Sally Field's Aunt May dealing with her struggling to support herself without Ben and going to nursing school. There's just so much stuffed into this movie, and the film presents a lot of problems that repeat themselves from Spider-Man 3, specifically with the villains. While not having as many villains as Spider-Man 3, this movie still has a pretty big villain problem. First off, Electro, played by Jamie Foxx. Similar to the Lizard but in a different way, Jamie Foxx's Electro doesn't really feel like he fits into the tone of this movie. It feels like he's given a completely different performance than the rest of the actors. Yes, this movie does come off as a live-action cartoon at times, with the Spider-Man sequences specifically, but the look of Max Dillon and the way that Jamie Foxx plays him is more in line with the comedy sketch like you would find on Saturday Night Live, or in living color because it's Jamie Foxx. And the movie does a pretty poor job setting up the conflict between Electro and Spider-Man. When we first get introduced to Max, he's saved by Spider-Man, and Spider-Man tells Max that he needs him. From there, we get a montage of Spider-Man going about his everyday heroic deeds, and in the background, a radio station is playing, and at one point, Max's voice comes on talking about how him and Spider-Man are friends. But if you're distracted by the visuals that are going on the screen and Spider-Man webbing up the guy in the convenience store, you totally miss Max's voice in the background.
He's protecting us. Not only that, but he saved my life one time. We sort of became best friends.
So by the time that we're in his apartment and he's surrounded by Spider-Man posters and convinces himself that Spider-Man baked him a cake for his birthday for some reason, it just feels completely out of place. And everyone who's watched this movie and reviewed this movie has said it before, but I'm going to say it again. He's the Riddler from Batman Forever. And the Riddler from Batman Forever would not fit into this Spider-Man movie, thus Jamie Foxx's Electro doesn't really fit in this Spider-Man movie. And much like Green Goblin, Doc Ock, Harry Osborn, the Lizard before him, once Max Dillon becomes Electro, he just has insane voices in his head. He just goes insane. But they work his inner thoughts of his insanity into this dubstep soundtrack that plays over the movie. It was just a really odd choice to go with. It really does come across to me as lazy writing once again for a villain. It's just so much tell and very little show. And after a fight in Times Square with Spider-Man, which is a pretty awesome Spider-Man fight in my opinion, they just dump Electro in the mental hospital with a very cartoony, over-the-top German scientist experimenting on him so that this movie can make room for Dane DeHaan's Harry Osborn. And the movie kind of has this rhythm to it where we go from villain to villain. It doesn't really focus on one particular villain. First we get introduced to Max, then Harry, then Max is the villain, then Harry is the villain, then Max and Harry team up and become the villains. And honestly, this movie would have benefited if it had just cut one of these villains out, in my opinion, Electro. I just don't think he fits. Wait,
Electro is way better than frickin' Harry.
you think they should have cut out Harry? You should just get in here.
Okay, so no, Electro had to be there because... Okay, well, maybe it's just because that's what the story was mostly built around. But I liked Electro. It made sense. And he's a more relatable person. Like, wanting attention, wanting the electricity. It made sense with his, like, superpower that he wanted the power. So he, like, literally became power, right? So they should have put more focus into Electro instead of taking attention from Electro and putting him into Harry and pulling a Spider-Man 3. No. That's, yeah,
She
no.
despised
They
the
went the
Spider-Man
wrong
3.
way. They went the wrong way with it, okay?
But Harry and Peter already had a connection.
But
so
we
if you
didn't know that yet.
But if you had built off that connection more, it could have made a more compelling villain in Harry if he had more time to focus on it.
Exactly, but I'm choosing off of who I know the best, which is Electro, because they actually built his story. They just kind of abandoned him and just put a bunch of CGI in there during the end. It's like you're in a video game.
You guys comment down below which villain should have been kicked out of this movie, Electro or Harry. Thanks, babe. But of course, Sony wasn't going to kick any of these villains out of the movie because they were using The Amazing Spider-Man 2 at the time to set up their Sinister Six movie that they wanted to do. And when you have that knowledge in mind, the Easter eggs and the setups for that movie are all throughout this movie, and it's just, they stick out like a sore thumb, and it's kind of sad to look back on. But much like the first film, it's pretty clear that Marc Webb wants to focus the story on Peter and Gwen and the promise that Peter made and then broke to Captain Stacy and keeping Gwen around as he's Spider-Man. And the guilt that he is facing from breaking that promise. He's being haunted by the ghost of Captain Stacy, and that's prevented him from being with Gwen. But whenever that storyline tries to rear its head, Marc Webb has to sideline it for the other 50 subplots going on in this movie. Because of course, Peter Parker is still digging deeper into the mystery of what happened to his parents. And honestly, of all the subplots in this movie that could have been cut out, I feel like this one should have been. Of all the subplots, this is the one that feels like it's in this movie for obligatory reasons. And it's the one subplot that feels like it kind of derails the movie. Once Peter gets back into his investigation mode on his parents, it really feels like the movie just kind of halts, stops in its tracks so that we can just suddenly focus on this storyline. And the way it comes about is just kind of ridiculous. Peter just breaks a calculator that has all these coins that takes him to a train station where a train literally rises up from the ground that has a video stored on its computer that Richard Parker uploaded 20 years ago while fighting someone on an airplane for Peter to watch and get all of the information that he needs. And I feel like the character of Peter gets kind of lost amongst all of these abundance of characters and storylines. We never really get to see the struggles that Peter has as Spider-Man in his everyday life. Sure, he has problems like he won't give his blood to Harry, and that causes a rift in their friendship. But even the relationship with Peter and Harry feels kind of forced in this movie. They get one scene together where they walk around and reminisce and tell us, the audience, that, hey guys, we're friends, this is my best buddy. And then we literally don't see them interact again until Harry asks for Peter's blood. It's just so obvious that they have Harry in this movie only to pull off the death of Gwen Stacy. For those of you who don't know, the death of Gwen Stacy was a huge monumental moment in Peter's life in the comics. It's one of the few times where his powers fail to save someone, and it leaves Peter feeling a tremendous amount of guilt. The Green Goblin throws Gwen off of a bridge, but Spider-Man is able to catch her as she's fallen by webbing her leg, but it causes her neck to snap. And the way they play it out in the comics is it's not really clear if Gwen Stacy was dead before the Goblin threw her off the bridge, or if it was Spider-Man's web that snapped her neck. And I can see where they were going with the death of Gwen Stacy, and I actually liked the idea of what they were doing because it's the consequence to Peter breaking his promise. Because he broke his promise to Captain Stacy and let Gwen come along for his Spider-Man adventures, ultimately he is the cause of her death. And while it is Gwen who shows up to these battles and Spider-Man does tell her, hey, you gotta get out of here, but she doesn't listen, she has to help, Peter does ultimately reluctantly let her help him defeat Electro. And it's after that decision that Peter sees the final ghost of Captain Stacy before Gwen dies, cementing his mistake. And while I do feel like there's some issues with how they handled the death of Gwen, like having Gwen insert herself into these superhero battles where she really has no purpose of being, it does make her come across a little bit foolish when she's like trying to insert herself on the battlefield without a weapon, or anything that comes close to her being able to defend herself. But even with that slight nitpick gnawing at me, man, the death of Gwen is just so well played. Andrew Garfield's performance is what really sells the tragedy of Gwen's death. You can just feel the pain, remorse, and guilt radiating off Peter in Gwen's final moments in his arms. It's a heartbreaking scene, and it's not only my favorite scene in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, it's probably one of the best Spider-Man scenes in any of the movies thus far. Honestly, guys, even with all these flaws and problems still in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 for me, this movie's gotten a lot better in my eyes over the years. I used to like it a lot less because it just felt so blatantly obvious that they were trying to set up all these spin-off movies and sequels that Sony eventually never did, and it just kind of felt like a waste of time to me to watch. And the story does still come across a bit as a scatterbrained mess. But with Electro and the Lizard being brought into the MCU with Tom Holland's No Way Home, I have found a lot more enjoyment in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 looking at it as an alternate universe film. And that feeling could get better or worse for me depending on how Electro and the Lizard play out in No Way Home. But whether The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is paid off more with No Way Home, my opinions on The Amazing Spider-Man and The Amazing Spider-Man 2 since I last reviewed these films in 2019 have flipped. I actually like The Amazing Spider-Man 2 better than The Amazing Spider-Man as a Spider-Man film. As a film itself, I do have to say that The Amazing Spider-Man is stronger in story and focus. But all of the performances are better in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, especially Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker and Spider-Man. There's just so many more moments in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 where I feel like I see the character of Spider-Man that I love so much. I love how in the first interaction with Electro, Peter doesn't just go in to kick his butt. He actually tries to talk him down at first. It's not until the policeman with the sniper shoots Electro that he's forced to fight him. And I adore the scene where Spider-Man helps the kid in the alleyway after he's being picked on and bullied and walks him home. That is a clear image. That is a clear, perfect picture of Spider-Man in my mind. And while my shortcomings and story issues still do lie with The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I can have a lot of fun with this as a Spider-Man movie. And for that reason, I'm just going to give The Amazing Spider-Man 2 a straightforward recommend. But what do you guys think of The Amazing Spider-Man 2? Are you looking forward to seeing Electro and the Lizard return in Spider-Man No Way Home? I'm probably Andrew Garfield. Comment down below, let me know. I want to know all your thoughts and opinions about this movie. Guys, as always, thank you so much for clicking on this video and checking out my channel. And join me again, guys, in a couple days. We'll be jumping over to the Marvel Cinematic Universe to talk about Spider-Man Homecoming. Till then, if you like talking movies, TV, and all things entertainment, why don't you go on and click that subscribe button, click that like button, click that notification bell, all that YouTube stuff. And I hope to talk to you guys again real soon.